Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it 1 minute, 1 or 2 more minutes before we start, just to let everyone else be able to jump on. All right, it looks like it's 1 minute after. We'll get started here. Let people join as they can. So thank you all for coming today to our presentation. We're going to be talking about remote MDS and clinical consulting. Hopefully after this, you'll be able to come out with some ideas about how remote MDS providers can support across the facility in their role. So today we have 3 different people facilitating this conversation. Myself and Shelly Patton are the VPs of Strategic Sales Growth here at Limitlessli, as well as Sandra Rich, who will be leading the charge. She is one of our SVPs of Clinical Reimbursement here at Limitlessli. So just talking about this session today, we really want to give you an honest look at what the service model looks like that we feel is commonly misunderstood. We want to give you the framework for evaluating remote clinical support of any kind, as well as give you an opportunity to ask questions that you have about remote work. Shelly will be manning the chat, so please, as you have questions, we'll be answering that as we go. We do want it to be sort of a free-flowing dialogue. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat. Shelly will help support getting those to Sandy as we're discussing. What today isn't going to be is a sales pitch. That's not what we're here for. We're here to support what this could look like within facilities. We won't be doing any product demos, and honestly, remote support isn't always right for each facility. So hopefully some of these examples will be able to identify if it's right for your facility or not. So as we jump in, we found that there has been some skepticism across the industry about remote MDS and clinical consulting. I think a lot of the pieces come from the fact that this has been ever evolving, especially since COVID. Initially, we saw that certain MDS companies were providing bare minimum services. That has evolved as the industry continues to grow, realizing regulatory pieces and being able to support facilities with our experience. We were seeing that data entry was marketed as clinical support, which we know just simple data entry isn't the same thing as clinical support. It isn't the same thing as looking at high level VBP, QRP, quality measures, PDPM, etc. Some of the skepticism came from remote getting labeled as impersonal and unaccountable. And we hope as we talk through some of our myths today, you'll actually see that is not the case, in fact. And then just in general, some facilities had some bad experience with remote work. For us, that hasn't been the case. We really work hard on building our partnerships, and we know that across the industry, remote workers do have that opportunity. So conversations changing, looking at remote workers and examining a couple different reasons. Clinical reimbursement oversight, as an example, when you're working with remote providers or even remote within your own organization, it allows you to have more high-level experienced clinical leaders supporting the boots on the ground work. allowing you to focus more in on the things that matter from a reimbursement perspective. We're seeing that remote MDS workers and doing clinical consulting allows you to have that real-time EHR access, IDT participation, and those are standard. Those aren't just opportunities. It's actually something that's expected from a day-to-day basis. And then lastly, just looking at accountability, making sure that as we're supporting organizations, supporting teams from a MDS perspective, you see the KPIs, you see the pieces of measurement, and you're able to hold people accountable as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Sandy here to start talking about some of the myths that we see and really what that reality looks like in practice.
Welcome, everybody, and I'm really happy to be here with you all. This today, like Megan said, let's get away from any education webinars that we're used to doing. It's a Wednesday. Let's have a candid conversation. And I see a lot of MDS coordinators registered today. Let's have a candid conversation about remote MDS coordinators. That's what we really today. And Megan said, please put any comments, any questions into the chat. We're going to go through some that I picked, some of the 4 myths. I could go on, some of the 4 myths that I really would like to dispel today for everybody. And like Megan said, it's super important that you guys, share your thoughts, especially the working MDS coordinators out there. We want to hear from you guys. Okay, myth 1. I love this. Remote MDS nurses can't truly understand a facility's residents. In my experience, and I've talked to many remote MDS coordinators over the years that I've been remote myself, and this one is important to dispel. Many times, MDS coordinators will come to me and they will find things remotely on the residents or, through the IDT process and no more than the actual teams that are on site and taking care of the residents. And that is not to put down the team that's on site and taking care of the residents, but to establish that our sole focus is really to get to know that resident through the MDS completion process and the care plan process and all that comes with it. So dispelling that myth that we truly don't understand the facility residents, we know our facility, our remote MDS coordinators day does start the same way an in-facility MDS coordinator starts her day. We look at census, we look at the discharges, we look at the readmits, we're scheduling MDSs, and we're right in that chart. We're right in that chart. So that one is one of my favorites to dispel. Myth number 2, this is a good one. Remote MDS and clinical consulting support is less oversight and control. Okay, I love to dispel this one because this one is all about and all of the technical support that's out there now, all of the advancements, which I think happened when the birth of the EMR happened. MDS coordinators 10, 20 years ago could never think about working remote because without that chart, we were helpless. We needed the chart. Now, everything being, we can conduct meetings, we sit through GG, we sit through stand-up, all of the technical advances that are out there for us, we can utilize. Teams meetings, Zooms, scrubbing, our scrubbing software that's out there, the ability to have phone line conferences and have, meetings, calls, whatever it is that you can do, we no longer have to be on site to provide that clinical consulting support to your facility.
Sandy, I'm an OT, so obviously this one's, important to me, but
Sure.
One of the things I hear you guys talk about a lot is, as part of your experience, is just looking at some of the process and procedure, and I see GG meetings on here. Can you talk a little bit, like one of the common things you see about GG meetings and how, like, just from an oversight perspective, like one of the things you guys go in and do with a lot of customers when we first jump in?
Sure, I love this. I welcome that. Thank you, Megan. The GG meetings, that is a myth that we can dispel. So many times, just as is in my position as Senior VP here at Limitlessli, we have gone into facilities where there have been no GG reviews, and we have actually started up and coordinated remotely a whole GG process that may include, depending on the software, completing an assessment, backing it up so that the support is there when the MDS coordinator is coding the MDS, and being prepared in the event of an audit, that all the supportive documentation is there for the REI and all done remotely. So many, many times, and thank you for reminding me of that, many times we go in and we will start processes like GG when the facility has none.
Yeah. Yeah. It always seems to allow you guys to have a lot more oversight when you start to put some of those pieces into place. So
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that does frequently come up as we're advancing into the facilities, is what do you do with GG, or dispelling that myth, Megan, that we can't do GGs because we're not on site.
Yep. Exactly.
Thank you for that. Okay, myth number 3. Oh, love this one too. Oh, I love this one. Remote MDS support is more expensive than hiring our own. I love to dispel this myth, okay? Let me just draw my experience again as SVP here at Limitlessli. My day, I can go from Missouri to Arkansas to New York to New Jersey, and I don't have to bother my bosses with any sort of travel reimbursement, anything like that. I can go state to state and be done in an 8-hour day, and no mileage, no putting in. So cost effective right there, that how many more facilities we can visit by doing it remotely. Okay, that one is a great one. I talked to an MDS coordinator today about this very thing, and it was interesting what she brought up, and she also mentioned that we're experts. Usually we're all familiar with the remote companies, and we all know what we're doing if we're a remote MDS coordinator. So the training, there's not much training involved. When we're also, remotely, somewhat work our lunches, maybe, a sick child, all of those things. And I'm not suggesting to any administrator out there that we're all going to go to lunch or a dentist or whatever during the day. I'm not suggesting that. Let's just say more flexibility throughout our day, and the ease of being able to, manage, your duties at home, as well as, what's expected of you at work, with a little bit more flexibility. So in actuality, remote, it's a cost saver because of the travel. Also too, with this, I've also done time studies in my experience and over my years, and with many MDS coordinators remotely. And I discovered through doing these time studies that an MDS coordinator remotely could get an average of 5 to 6 MDSs done in a day. And of course, that would depend on the reason for the assessment. Obviously, we know if it's an annual or comprehensive, that might take us a little longer. But point being, we were able to go from initial to submission, completion, maybe look at the care plan, all of the aspects of the MDS, and do more in a day than the facility MDS coordinators, who many, many times would say to me, well, I started one, when I would go around and say, well, how many MDSs did you get completed today? Well, I was able to start one. Then I had 3 hours worth of meetings. And then I had, then there was the health department came in, and then we needed to pass trays, and all of these things are part of the daily operations, but it also can place a distraction on the MDS coordinator and make her hours or his hours less productive during the workday.
Yeah. Thanks, Sandy. And I know obviously when you talk, you're going state to state, that's because you're acting more as a larger oversight supporting the teams, right? Obviously on site for each facility, you're going to have your own remote MDS coordinator. But I think as an organization, you have regional nurses who are supporting, multiple sites, multiple states. One thing I think too,
Exactly.
one thing I have to
Exactly.
add is that one of the when we talk about efficiency too, and one of the things that I think when I from my perspective, what I hear from facilities is how do we know that they're, really spending their time doing what we need to do, obviously outside of KPIs of monitoring, right, the number of MDS is done or care plans, whatever it may be. I know there's lots of technology out there to manage efficiency, right? For us, as an example, we use Time Doctor. So we have MDS coordinators who are going in there, they're clocking in their time specifically into it. And our system actually screenshots what they're doing. It actually, if the mouse isn't moving, if they're not actively working within their remote desktop, it's going to try to clock them out from that perspective. So lots of technology that allows for facilities and organizations to manage some of that time efficiency, from a remote perspective without having to be, micromanaging them from day to day. So,
Exactly.
yeah, so I think
Exactly.
that's great. And then we go to myth 4. Sandy, take it back.
Oh, myth 4. And of course, I picked the top 4. There's more myths, and I would love to hear from you guys, myths that we can dispel. Myth 4, this is a good one too. Remote outsourced MDS support is just a workaround for staffing shortages. Anybody who's an MDS coordinator or involved in the MDS, career today knows that there is a shortage of MDS coordinators. There's been many changes, and they're difficult and comprehensive. And it's a difficult kind of job to maneuver. And that's why the distractions have become more burdensome to the MDS coordinator than they were many years ago. Okay, so a lot of times companies will we will fill in, or we all know the companies that are out there, and maybe we'll start off as, maternity leave, or because they're in between hiring an MDS coordinator, and nobody really can think in the long term that we could actually stay on and become part of the team. And in my experience, I've seen this happen over and over again. The MDS coordinator that might have been hired remote support until an in-facility coordinator was found, ends up gelling with the team and becoming just that key person that an in-facility MDS coordinator became to them. And they depend on that MDS coordinator, whether she or he is remote or in facility. So the job doesn't change, and the aspects of the job doesn't change. We become part of the IDT pretty quickly as things start to gel, and we're attending meetings the same. We're reachable the same, questions about the scheduling, questions about, the day-to-day tasks within the MDS coordinator. When should we care plan this? Is this a SIG change? All of those things are manageable. And what we find is maybe being hired as a temp solution that turns into us becoming long-term partners, within a facility because of all the advancements in technology, and it just works. It just works.
I can think of our partners. We have some partners in Arkansas, and obviously not the easiest to staff, right? And thinking about, the MDS turnover that they had, we're doing consulting for them, but we continue to see the MDS turnover happen, just whether it's from someone not performing well or just, someone moving on. And then you see those inconsistencies and those gaps in coverage, and
Oh,
you
yes.
see the quality measures drop, and you see the PDPM drop. And I know for us at that one point, because we were consulting and supporting, and they did have that consistent turnover, it was actually easier for us to come in as their full-time solution, to really support not having those gaps in care. Because obviously, if you get behind, it means way more than just getting behind, right? There's the clinical piece of it, there's the compliance piece of it, there's the reimbursement piece of it. And I can think of a couple of customers that we've had, whether it's full-time or part-time positions, that we've jumped in because it's just staffing turnover is consistently happening. So.
Oh, yes, and like we just spoke about, like with the GG meetings, also coming in and establishing processes for your IDT that may not have been there before. That's how the trust is then built between the IDT and the MDS coordinator in the same way as it would be if it's in facility. And I've, again, noticed over my years that it becomes a secure feeling to the IDT that that remote MDS coordinator is there and reachable. You know, not there's less putting in for PTO days because I mentioned the flexible staffing. You know, generally we can answer a call. You know, there's no punching in, punching out, and then we're done. And if it's a 3-day weekend, you don't hear from the MDS coordinator. You know, it's a whole different world when you're remote and you have access to these things 24/7 and the passion to do it the way that I've seen MDS coordinators over the years. You have to have passion to do it. We're a different type of nurse.
Say that this is one of my favorite ones. I know I'm answering the chat, but
Okay.
Shelly, I have to say this is one of my favorite ones. I would say, quite honestly, facilities that are interested in this myth versus reality, and they are concerned about jumping on and trying to do it remote. I love the fact that they're like, you know what, we're going to use you because we need somebody right now, but we don't think this is going to work as a long-term fix. Then they realize they don't have any staffing turnover. Another thing is state survey. They think when the state survey walks in, what are we going to do? Our nurse is available. We just had one happen recently. They got on the phone at 7 o'clock at night with that surveyor and answered all the questions, did everything remotely. But you've got a team of people laser focused on what's going on in the facility. And I think from an oversight perspective, you cannot, I've had so many administrators turn around and say, this is a really good option for us, but they all started out of fear. And that's honestly, I love it when they come to me that way, because I absolutely know they're going to realize that remote MDS is truly a possibility.
Love
Yeah.
that. Yes.
I agree. And I'm seeing more and more large organizations too, right? Like I know we're pulling from our experiences as a company, but like we were just in Ohio talking to some large organizations that have similar setups to us. And it's just a trending movement, right? To continue to see the lack of staffing gaps or that support, that flexible support being able to provide. So you know, it's happening more and more out there.
Sandy, we have a question in the chat.
Sure.
The question is, are the nurses all RNs meeting regulatory requirements?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We are put through the same qualifications for an RN in facility MDS coordinator. The same is for a remote. She has to be licensed, or he has to be licensed in the state to which you are completing MDSs. And again, that RN needs to be signing section Z0500 for the team. And, you know, this might be a good place because of that question, and thank you for that, to really, you know, explain what an MDS coordinator is versus maybe you know, a nurse assessment coordinator. Okay, the MDS coordinator, the reason the word coordinator is at the end of that is because we coordinate the processes. We don't just complete. We coordinate the processes. We make sure that when that MDS is done, the interdisciplinary team, including the interviews, and, you know, even if you're remote, you know, setting up the interview process within the facility, obviously, you know, the interviews would need to be done by somebody in the facility. But interview process, you know, we coordinate the processes because we know what is needed in that MDS to feed the quality measures, the reimbursement, the regulatory requirements of the RAI. We know with every question where it's going to feed. And so definitely, thank you for that question. Definitely an RN is qualified and licensed. Thank you, Shelly.
Okay. All right. So, Sandy, you want to take this?
Yeah, So generally when, I like to, anybody who's out there who has worked with me, I saw some familiar names. Everybody knows that I like a remote model. I support it because I've devoted most of my nursing career, 33 years, to MDS, and I'm passionate about it. I like to call it like a remote model. And these are some of the questions that, to know, like Megan said in the beginning, is this right for you? Is it not? There might be administrators, I've dealt with them too, that just say, no, no, I am not comfortable with that. My MDS coordinator, she needs to be in the facility, and that's fine too. It might not work. Some of the things that you would want to have the answers to is, number one, who performs the clinical work? Number two, who supervises that work and where are they based? How is the communication structured with the on-site team? It has to be good, clear-cut communication, whether you're remote or in facility. I'd like to put that out there. What does the reporting cadence look like day to day? How is scope defined and what happens when it changes? And number six, how is quality measured and how is it shared with the facility? All of these things, if it can support a remote model or not. I mean, you all know your facilities, you know if you can make it happen. I think the MDS coordinators out there would all agree that we could do way more remotely than we do in the facility with the distractions. Operational and clinical benefits. Again, this is just takeaways from what we just all talked about. Timely and accurate MDS completion is always the priority for your MDS coordinator, remote or in facility. Reduced staff burden and burnout, definitely that helps a remote MDS coordinator. Improved PDPM documentation alignment. I don't think we touched upon enough about how, I think Shelly, you mentioned being laser focused in the EMR. That is our sole job. And that's why some of these myths are so easy for me to dispel, because I have had MDS coordinators come and say, we missed an IV fluid and the resident still has temps. And this is coming from a remote MDS coordinator while nurses and hands-on staff are in the facility. And why is that? Because we're in the chart. We're laser focused on the day-to-day happenings of your residents, and we're able to communicate and get that out there. I've had instances like that, examples like that, that I could share, orders not being taken off that MDS coordinators will find in the prep work of coordinating that MDS and or completing it, the MDS. Care plans weren't filled out. Nobody else in the facility has that luxury to be able to be laser focused in the chart from beginning to end. So the documentation is just huge.
Cindy, I know we just have a couple minutes left. I
Sure.
think maybe if we could just briefly go over some of these, what the partnership looks like. And then if we have any other questions too, we can get to those.
Sure. You could
which
take
one
this
to-
one, Megan, what the partnership delivers. Sure.
Of course.
Thank you.
So whether it's a remote partnership, whether it's your own internal structure, you obviously want to make sure, to the question in the chat, that you have the experienced MDS coordinators, people that understand PDPM, people that understand what the implications of dashing too much, right? That's becoming more and more important as we look at value-based purchasing and evolving. It's really important to have that clear reporting, that clear, honest communication, transparency, looking into the accountability piece, looking into the regulatory piece, and having a partner who's going to understand that. Having a partner that's going to understand and support your clinical documentation and your compliance pieces, making sure you have that consistency of when, especially across, if it's a chain of multiple facilities, looking at some of those consistencies and the roll up of communication and reporting. And then just really looking at the risk, right? Do you have a partner who has multiple eyes on what they're doing in order to mitigate any of that risk that might be out there? So as we wrap up, I know we, had a question. If there's any other questions we would love to take those now. We can always take them offline as well. We do have our information right here. We would be happy to do any follow-up questions, supporting with Shelly, Sandy, or I as well. And next, we thank you all so much for your time. We hope you guys at least had one little nugget of takeaway today, and you guys are able to explore some of these options for yourselves as well.
Great.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you,
Have a wonderful
everybody.
day.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.